All right, everyone. So, okay, great. We have questions already. So we'll be taking up all of those questions later in the Q&A round after the back-to-back conferences that we have lined up for you. So I present you now the next speaker, that is Saeed. So by the time Saeed is setting up his presentation, uh, I will just tell you a little about what like what uh, his bio is, and yeah. So for this blog about case studies and best practices, we have Saeed. He is an enthusiastic learner and a JavaScript developer who loves working on React and React Native. Uh, I also Saeed also like to give back to the community, and for that, he has given multiple tech talks and also contributed for the open source world. And he's still contributing, I guess. So, okay, so I guess Saeed will be taking up a little more time. Uh, until then, let's see where are we from. So I saw Europe in the last comment, in the last previous link. So where are you people joining us from? I'm from India, joining you guys from Rajasthan. One guys.
Hello, Prakriti. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction.
Hi,
I
Saeed.
would say, yep. Hello.
So let's start your screen share,
Yeah.
and
I'm just,
we'll we'll just start the stage for you.
all right. So I'm just gonna share my screen.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you. Can you guys see it? Um, all right. So I shall begin. So it's thank you for such a wonderful introduction, Prakriti. It was really good. I'm Syed Saifullah Sandari. I'm a senior software engineer at Folio 3 from Pakistan. I mainly work on JavaScript and its related technologies, which which I focus on React Native, and Node.js. In this talk, this presentation, we are going to discuss about the server-side rendering of React using Next.js. But before moving directly to Next.js, we'll first discuss about the server-side rendering itself. What are the types of server-side rendering? We'll do a small performance analysis of server-side rendering, and then we'll move towards the Next.js. First, the introduction and some pre-rendering types of Next.js, and then we'll finally move towards the code demo. So let's start with the server-side rendering. That what is actually server-side rendering? So server-side rendering is when the HTML is generated at the with the data at the end of the server. So in other words, when a user requests a website, server fetches the data, prepares the HTML, and then returns the prepared HTML to the user. So in this manner, user doesn't have to wait for the data to come when the website is already loaded. So let's see a timeline for the server-side rendering. We can see here that user opens a website, browser sends request to the server. In the meanwhile, user is waiting for the response. Like user is seeing a white blank screen on a loader. Server will fetch the data from any resources, any database or other resource, and prepare the HTML with it, and then return it to the user. As soon as the HTML is returned to the browser starts downloading the JS, JavaScript, and other assets. And when as soon as the JavaScript and the other assets are downloaded, browser executes the React in case of our Next.js, and and then the user is able to use the app. So this is just a simple timeline for the for server side rendering. And when it comes to the rendering, then we have two types of the rendering. One is the rendering, and the other is the dynamic rendering. Static rendering, as it suggests by the name, is it it plays with all the static data. In this rendering, data is always static, and HTML is generated just one time, and then it is used all the time. So the HTML is not generated at every request, but it's just generated at the build time. But when it comes to the dynamic rendering, in the dynamic rendering, the HTML generation is also dynamic. and that generation depends on the request, and then request upon the request, server fetches the data based on the any parameter of the request, and with that data, server prepares the HTML and then that returns to the user. So let's understand it again with the flow diagram. We can see here that user requests to the server. Server has everything stated: HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and CSS. And server then simply returns the static HTML to the user. But in the case of dynamic server-side rendering, server user request to the server. Server then, on the basis of those requests, server then requests to the database or any other resource, and then as soon as the data is arrived to the server, server then prepares the HTML for that data, and then sends back the dynamically generated HTML to the user. But notice that this part, when the server is requesting the data from the database, that this can take some time. So we'll come to the metrics in the performance analysis coming. So before moving towards the analysis, first we I would like to share what metrics we would be discussing in the performance analysis. The first is the time to first byte. Time to first byte for any web app is the time when the user first hits the app, hits any URL, and when the first byte that is received to the user. So that is the time to first byte. And first contentful paint is refers to the visibility of the content to the user. When's the first time any content is visible to the user, and that content does not include any images or some other stuff, but any meaningful content like text or article bodies and the other stuff. And the third metric is time to interact. The time to interactive is we can say the time when user is able to interact with the website. So when we work with the client side rendering, when we deal with the client side rendering, we see that after the website is loaded, we see a loader moving around, and we are still not able to interact with the website even the website is loaded. So this is the time to interact, that how when user is able to interact with the website. So when it comes to the server-side rendering, the first contentful paint for the server-side rendering is relatively fast than the client-side. Client-side rendering, because the HTML comes prefetched with the data. The data is already there with the HTML, and also the time to interact for the server-side rendering is pretty fast as compared to client-side rendering, because in terms of server-side rendering, there is no JavaScript API calls and other execution that will block the user from interacting with the website. But as I discussed earlier, that since the data fetching happens at the server side, so the time to first byte can be longer for server side rendering. So you can simply say that the load time for the server side rendering can be longer, because server fetches some data and then prepares the HTML with it. So this is one comparison for the server-side rendering and client-side rendering, which I picked from an article from Google. We can see here that when in the case of server-side rendering, as soon as the user request any page, we get the first contentful paint, and right after that just after a few seconds, in fact milliseconds, the user is able to interact with the website. TTI has completed. But in the case of client-side rendering, we see that the user has requested the HTML. In the client-side rendering, we get an empty HTML or HTML with with static data. The client then downloads the JS and then start executing the JS and making the API calls. And in that time, the user is completely blocked and cannot interact with the website. So this is one of the major difference between the client side rendering and the server side rendering. But another advantage of using server side rendering is the SEO, search engine optimization. Why it is basically the server side rendering is very much recommended for a better SEO. Why? Because it is very easy for crawlers to crawl the website that are rendered at the server side. And why is that? Because as soon as the website is loaded, a crawler can crawl a website. If you think from the perspective of the crawler, as soon as the crawler goes to crawl the website, the crawler waits for first it waits for the website to load, and then it wants to crawl it as soon as the website is loaded on the window.onload event. So this favors the point of server side rendering, that as soon as the site is loaded, the crawler can start crawling the websites. But in the case of client side rendering, crawler has to wait even after the website is loaded. So it can be a bit difficult for crawler to crawl websites that are rendered client side. So this is one of the advantages as well for using server side rendering for better SEO. One of the reason for starting with the Next.js in our company was this, that we wanted our website to be better SEO search engine optimized. So coming back to the problem that we discussed earlier about the slow TTFV, slow time to first byte, or you can say a longer load time for the website. Uh, we know that it happens because server has to fetch data and prepare the HTML with that data. Server fetches the data from most of the time from the DB, and then what we can do to improve it, we can add caches, DB caches like Redis in between the server and the DB, which can somehow improve the time for data fetching time for the server, and will eventually improve our load time. And the other things that we can use and decide by ourselves, that where we should use static rendering and where we should use dynamic rendering. Because if we decide properly that if our work can be done with the static rendering, there's no need of use dynamic rendering, and static rendering is very much faster than the dynamic rendering. So that was some introduction for the server side rendering. Now coming to the Next.js, I hope you guys understood the basic point of server side rendering. Now coming to the Next.js, Next.js is the framework for React.js React.js rendering of server side. At the backend, Next.js uses Node.js, and for the UI, Next.js uses React. Next.js itself is a very powerful framework. It obviously have all the features that are needed by the server side, that pre-rendering, and generating the HTML at the server side, and a better performance for the SEO. And again, Next.js supports all both the two types of rendering, the static rendering and the dynamic rendering. So, but the Next.js calls the static rendering as static generation, and the server side rendering as the dynamic rendering as the server side rendering. But I'm going to again repeat what was the static generation. The static generation was when the HTML was generated at build time with the static data, and then it is not generated on every request. But for the server side rendering or dynamic rendering, HTML is generated on every request. So let's see the pre-rendering. It's pretty simple. It's pre-render HTML is displayed here with the data. JavaScript loads here. The React hooks up, and then we are able to navigate and all the interact with the website. But in the case of normal plain React app, JavaScript first needs to be downloaded. App is not rendered yet. The app is HTML is empty, and as soon as the JavaScript hooks up, then the React components hooks up to the app, and now app is interactive as well. So and the static generation or static rendering, Next.js has further divided the static rendering into two parts. One is the static generation, that is the default one that we discussed both the times, and the other is the static generation with data. This is the static generation with data, and the data is dynamic. But since it is the static generation, this rendering also happens at the build time, but the data we have here is dynamic. So this is one small difference between the static generation and the static generation with data. And I must tell you that the static generation, just the static generation is recommended by Next.js, and it is the default way of rendering. So even if you're not using any out of the box server side function for Next.js, then Next.js will use the static generation for the rendering of the component. So let's move forward. Let's see the static generation without data. In this case, at the build time, HTML pages are generated. There is no need to fetch any external data. We are using all the static data with the HTML, so it's pretty simple. But when we see the static generation with data, what happens here is that at the build time. Note that at the build time, not at the request time. At the build time, Next.js fetches some external data based on any parameters, and then prepares the HTML with that data. But again, I'm going to emphasize that this happens at the build time, not at the request time. And the third time, that is the dynamic rendering. We already discussed it. That servers at every request, the server is going to fetch some data and prepare the HTML. There are some out-of-the-box functions that are provided by Next.js for the server-side rendering. One is the this get server-side props. This is the function where all the server-side stuff would be done, and this function only works at the server side. We get the access of request in this function, and using that request, we can fetch any relevant data, and then pass that data to the HTML. One thing I missed, for which I would like to go back, is these two functions which I missed to discuss about: get static props and get static paths. Get static props is similar to the get server side rendering function that we just discussed, but this function only runs at the build time, and this function gets server side props always runs at the request time. There is one third function that is get static paths, and this is for building the static paths at the build time. We'll come to that later in the code demo. So as we were discussing the server side rendering, at the server side rendering, user as whenever user requests a page, HTML is generated every time the user is requesting the page. From the flow diagram, we can understand that user requests a page, Next.js fetches some data, prepares the HTML, and then returns the HTML to the page. And this cycles happen every time user is requesting the page. Unlike the static generation with data, that the this cycle only happened at the build time, and this generated HTML was reused again and again for the same request. So now, when we want to use Next.js, what are the prerequisites for it? For the prerequisites for Next.js is simple: Node.js, the latest version of Node.js, and any comfortable editor that you like. For how to bootstrap Next.js app, if you have the latest version of Node, then you would probably have npx by default, and we have a command line tool for the Next.js that is called create next app. Using this now command line tool, we can simply bootstrap a Next.js app. This From the npx to create next app. This is the command line for creating the app, and this is the name for the app that you want to give. There are other options as well with this create next step command line tool. This tool is itself a very powerful tool. There are multiple templates online uh, which you can use to bootstrap the app. Like, you can use the TypeScript template and other template. Uh, this here, what we are seeing, will initiate with bootstrap a very basic next step, but if you want to use any template, then you can also use the template with this command, and the app that will be bootstrap will be much more better than the basic version of it. So when it comes to the front end, or for a web app, one of the major thing is the routing. That whenever we start with the web app, first we focus that how we are going to uh, navigate between the pages, what would be the architecture of the pages, and then how what would be the flow of the app, the routing of the app. So the Next.js routing is pretty simple. It's very similar to the PHP, where there is one directory, and that's called pages at the root of the project. And whatever is there in that page, in the folder, in the directory of pages, will be resolved as a route at Next.js. So for example, if we have a page here, if in the pages folder, in the pages directory at the root, we have a folder named for posts, and and a file name firstpost.js. Then the route for this page will be posts and the first post, and simply the first post. So it's very similar to PHP. Whatever you will add inside the pages directory will be resolved to the route, and the root route for the app will be resolved with the index.js, like pages slash index.js file that will resolve to the route of the web app. Now, coming to the routing, the navigation, how we discussed that how the routes will be made. Now how now there comes a question that how we are going to navigate between the pages. Well, there are we can navigate between the pages using the Anchor tag itself as well, but there is another thing that Next.js provide out of the box, that is the link component, and it's very simple to use, and just wrapping an anchor tag with the link component, we can achieve the client side navigation of our application. So whenever we can see this here in the example. This is the example for the page for the route. This is the pages for directory in our root at our root of the project. The posts, the post file, the post folder, and then the first post.js. So this will be the route of our first post.js file. That is the slash post slash first post, and the root of the app will be at the index.js file. Whatever we want to render at the root of the website, we have to put that in the index.js. And so now discussing about the routing, the navigating between the pages, we have simply the anchor tag, and we have wrapped the anchor tag with the link tag, with link component. Notice that the href is not inside the anchor tag, but it is with the link component. So this is one of the uh, needed thing for this link component in order to achieve the client side rendering. Now coming towards the assets, metadata, and CSS. So discussing about the assets, Next.js can serve static assets inside a public folder that too will be at the root level, and whatever will be inside that public folder can be accessed directly in the app, rather than providing a complete path for that asset. So this makes a very easy to use, accessing assets very easy. And I'll show that I will also show that in the code example as well. And now coming to the metadata, let's see it through the code. um, so I have created this project. This is the very simple project that I have created from the next year. It's learn uh, learning part on Next.js official documentation. So this layout is common on every page, and every page is wrapped in this particular layout. So and for in order to add metadata to any web page in Next.js, uh, we have to use a tag that is called head, or a component that is called head. Now the question comes here that why we need to use the head tag when we can add directly use the link and other metadata tags. Well, the reason is that the HTMLs are generated pre-generated at the server side. So some things that cannot be so if we'll use these metadata tags outside of the head, that these will not work. And if you if in order to work with the metadata, we'll have to put that metadata inside the head tag, and simply whatever in that will be in the head tag will be will be rendered for the metadata. And if it can be overridden, like if you want to have a different like if you want to have a different title for different pages, then you can simply use the head on other pages as well. So it's not necessary to use the head at the root level, you can use the head at other pages as well. And now coming back to the presentation. So the third thing is the CSS. Next.js provides a very good support for the CSS. Like you can use the styled components, styled that is one approach, and then the other approach is the styled JSX, or you can simply use the simple CSS. But and the fourth one is that the modular CSS, approach, which I've also used in my demo, my example. We can see here that I have created a file called layout.module.css. In this file, we have just a few classes, and we can simply import this file in our component like this, and then use the classes as a just like we are using a JSON object. One benefit of using the modular CSS is that whenever we'll let me show you the whenever we'll repeat the name of any class name, then it will not create issue and any issue for us. Why? Um, why? Because when we use the modular approach for the CSS, the class names are always generated. Although we are using a simple class name that is container, but when it comes to the rendering, the class names are always unique for the module CSS. You can see here that I use class name container uh, like this, and I've used this container at the div and this div, and at the end you can see that this container this container class is rendered as a as a unique class name. So now we can use the say we can summarize that this we can use same name at other CSS files as well. But there is one limitation or one that is that in order to kick it off and work with this modular approach of CSS, we have to make the CSS file with the name of dot module dot CSS. So it is necessary to add dot module dot with in a file to in order for Next.js to understand that okay, I have to uh, use this CSS in this manner. And talking about the CSS, let me show you the image part as well. So I have put this image, my file image in this public directory in a folder of images, and then the file name. So how am I accessing this image? It's pretty simple. You can see that I have not provided a complete path to the public folder, but I have simply just added uh, the path that is inside the public folder, and Next.js will eventually uh, get the image source and render it. One more thing about the images that the yep. So Next.js suppose automatic resize and optimization of the image, uh, and so this is one of the things that comes out of the box for the Next.js, and it is complete and it is provided by default. You don't have to do anything separately for this feature. And one more thing, that the images are only loaded when they enter the viewport of the website. If for someone who doesn't know what is a viewport, then viewport is the when it comes visible to the screen. That's what it's mean. So notice that this is just for the example I wrote here that the complete path for the image, if had it not been the Next.js static path public folder, I had to give the feature that Next.js provide to um, access the asset. I would have to provide this complete path, which looks dirty when we compare it to this path. So yeah, and now coming to the third thing, that is the pre-rendering and data fetching. So this is major demo or stuff that we are going to cover now. That is the pre-rendering of the Next.js. Uh, Let me first give the demo for the app, that what the app is doing. So simply at the root of the app, we are rendering two list items, and these list items take us to the blog itself. Yep. So you can see here that upon clicking that list item, I'm able to see a blog. Sorry, and then again this second list item, I will be able to see the blog. So on the at the root of the web app, we are rendering these two list items. So let's see how we are rendering these two list items. So coming to the pages, as I mentioned before, that the root file for the our web app would be pages, um, and for and slash index.js. So in this index.js, you can see that there is this is one the function that is called get static props. This function only runs at the server side, and again this function runs at the build time, not at the request time but at the build time. But in the development mode it always it runs at the request time, so that since we are developing it right now. But at in the production mode it only runs at the build time. One more thing, this function that is only allowed in the pages folder. uh, if you use this function in any other page, like any other folder, then this function will not work. Next.js only knows that to render server-side rendering, that is that whatever is inside the pages function. So let's see. Uh, so yeah, you can see that this log that I have added in this function only ran at the server side. And this log that I have mentioned here in the component ran at both places, the server side and at the client side. How we can see that at the terminal from where we have run our application, we can only see the log of I'm running at server, and at the console at the client we can see that I'm running at the client. Um, why we are seeing this at the server side? Because Next.js prepares the HTML at the server side for pre-rendering and then sends it to the client side. So this runs always once at the server side as well. Um, so yeah, so what is happening is that at the server side we are fetching the data for the posts. I assume that this is some API call, and then we are fetching the data from some API or from data or on any database, and then we after fetching that data we return that data to the props. And then what happens? The question arises that what happens then? After we return this data in the props, then this component that is inside the pages will get the data in its props. So what happens is that first this function runs, this fetches the data, and it returns the data to the props. And when as soon as this component starts hooking up, it receives the data, and we can then simply return render that data. So that's how the server-side rendering works. And similarly, the same approach we can use the function of get server-side props, but the difference would be that function would run at every request, and not and this function would always run at the build time. But since we are working in the development environment, we are seeing this log here. So in the development environment, this function runs every time. Um, One thing that I would ask myself when I'm working with any web application, that how we are going to use the dynamic routes at any route that like if we have the product detail, uh, or say detail and any specific ID, then I want that for every specific ID I see every different page. So how am I going to handle the dynamic routing? Because we all know that we haven't discussed the dynamic routing yet. And but why we haven't discussed it? Because we are just going to discuss it now. Like you can say like this is the route that we want to make, and how we are going to make it. We're simply going to add. This is the out of the box approach that is provided by Next.js. That is inside the post folder. I have created a file id.js, but it's not simple id.js. but you can see that this ID is inside the square braces. The reason of putting this ID inside the square braces is that whenever we want to um, fetch any parameter of the request, and that parameter, just suppose that I want to fetch this parameter of the request for server to fetch the data from the DB. So I want something, some variable at least something to access this variable, at least some name to access this variable. So what name we would in this example, like we have post. So post slash our ID, and since we need anything, any variable, any name to access this variable, that name would be ID. We have that name would come inside the square braces, so we can write anything here, whatever we would like to have. And how we are going to access it, in the function that we used earlier here, get set props, we are again using this function because we are using working with the static data, but we are building that data at the build time, generating the HTML at the build time. So in this function, we get we receive a property in its argument called params. Params are basically the route params of the route, and in this param we can access this variable with this ID, with a variable ID. Why we can access this variable with the ID? Because we have named the ID, the file with the square braces ID in it. If I'll change suppose and say just EEC, and then I will have to access this with in this way. So this is how we are going to access the dynamic. We are going to make the dynamic routes and access the data from the request. Um, but one more thing, that there is another function that is called get static paths. Why we are using this function? And notice that I'm only fetching the IDs and returning the ID array from this function. The reason of using that is that since we are using the dynamic rendering, and that also at the build time. So Next.js at the runtime needs to know that what path Next.js should expect. So in order to tell for this static data, so in order to tell the Next.js that you should expect these paths for this file, inside these data, for these data, we will simply fetch the IDs and then return it to the and then simply return it from this function, and that's how Next.js would know that okay, we I have some dynamic page rendering at the build time, and in order to you reuse every part, every page is HTML. We can tell that okay, these are the paths. So one of the main another reason for providing these paths is for Next.js is to reuse the pages. Uh, this page is not rendered at the runtime, but it was rendered at the build time, and now no, and similarly this page is not rendered at is not recreated at the request time, but it was created back at the build time, and Next.js is not simply just reusing that page. So in order to Next.js to reuse that dynamic page that was built at the build time, it is necessary to provide the paths return that 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 the Next.js should expect. Um, that's the simple example for the for how the server-side rendering would work. But that's just not the end of the Next.js features. One more thing that I would like to add that um, I didn't mention, but I would like to go on with that. We can also make APIs using Next.js, and they are so simple to make that it feels like just like a piece of cake. But it is necessary to make an API. It is necessary to to put the API, our API, in the folder of API, so that Next.js would know that okay, this I should treat These files are as the API files, not as the front end files. So it's pretty simple to access the API. So to make any API in the Next.js, so you can see here that in the pages folder I have created a folder named API, and that folder I have created a path. I'm using the word path because eventually in the language of Next.js, this file is the path. I've created a path called hello.js, and let's see if it's working or not. So we can see here that I created simply the path for the API is this path, and I can see the response that I have written from here in my screen. So this is another feature of Next.js. Apart from just the server side rendering, we can also make APIs using Next.js. One more thing that's not mentioned there, we can also overwrite the Node.js part of the Next.js if we need anything like that. Although we wouldn't need something like that, but we can override, and for that we will have to use a server.js file, which I have not mentioned it, and so it's and it would also be something advanced for our for our current discussion. So that's all for the Next.js introductory session. um, I hope you all liked it, and I'll be responding to the question if you have any. And I hope that you guys will be using the Next.js uh, in your application, in your development, future development as well. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you so much, Said. It was a great insight on Next.js and all the related the the boilerplate that you created and a little bit of here and there edits that you've made. Really
Thank you.
liked it. Thank you so much, Said. All the questions related to Said's talk, we'll be addressing it later on uh, in the Q&A session. Until then, please hold back your questions and answers. Uh, and let's talk about the next uh, discussion that we are going to have.